Hello and welcome to B to Z Mods. Today we're working on our 2000 Toyota 4Runner limited edition, and we'll be replacing the alternator belt, the power string belt, and the AC compressor belt. Here's the belts we're using. Let's get this show on a roll. Here's the two skid plates we removed. It's not absolutely necessary to take both these skid plates off, but for some reason I did anyway. So you only need to take the big one off. That's the one closest to the front bumper. And doing so will give you access to the AC compressor belt idler pulley. Okay, now here on our forward skid plate, we had 6 mounting bolts to remove. And here are their locations, and they are 13mm hex heads. Now we're going to take out our intake air filter box. This is going to give us better access to the power steering bolts and such. Here is the first 12mm hex head mounting bolt for the intake filter box. And here's another mounting bolt for our intake box. And here's the third mounting bolt. And next we're going to loosen our air intake hose clamp, and we're going to disconnect our mass airflow sensor connector. Just a quick note, all nuts, bolts, and fasteners are loosened in a counterclockwise direction in this video. Okay, now for our intake hose clamp, we're going to use a 10mm socket, but you can also use a number 3 Phillips tip apex bit or number 3 screwdriver. Now we're disconnecting our mass airflow sensor connector. Just put it to the side out of the way, and we're gonna remove our vacuum hose to our air box and set it to the side. Now we're going to remove our intake hose, or disconnect our intake hose from the air intake box. Just wiggle it, twist it a little bit, it should come loose, just like that. Boom. Okay, now here we're going to show you guys the 14mm adjustable bolt for our power steering belt tension. And as we continue on our passenger side, here's our 14mm mounting bolt for the power steering pump. We're gonna loosen this bolt, and we're gonna loosen the bolt right below it. It's actually a nut directly below it. They're both 14mm. I'm loosening the top bolt and the bottom nut in order for the power steering pump to move freely when I start to loosen the tensioner bolt on the bottom of the power steering pump. And here's another angle to get a look at our power steering pump lower mounting nut. There it is. Now once our 2 mounting bolts on our power steering pump are loose, it will allow the power steering pump itself to move freely as we begin to loosen the tensioner bolt on the bottom right here. Okay, now after loosening your tensioner bolt, your power steering pump will move just like this, just enough to remove your power steering belt. And after moving your power steering pump, if your belt doesn't come right off, just continue to loosen your 14mm tensioner nut or tensioner bolt on the bottom of the pump. All right, now that we're under the vehicle, we're going to locate our compressor pulley nut, which is right here. You'll need to loosen this nut first before loosening the tensioner bolt. Okay, we're gonna look at this compressor pulley at a different angle, and here you're gonna see your compressor pulley tensioner bolt. The tensioner bolt is a 14 millimeter as well as your pulley nut on the front side. So now I'm gonna loosen the compressor pulley nut, and after that I'll loosen the pulley tensioner bolt, and both of these are 14 millimeter. Now when you're loosening the tension bolts, only loosen them to get enough movement out of your pulley to remove your drive belt. Alrighty, let's move over to the driver's side to take off our alternator belt. We're gonna loosen this alternator top bolt. It's a 14 millimeter. Here we're going underneath the vehicle to get a view of the bottom. You must loosen this bottom nut before adjusting or tightening the 12 millimeter tensioner bolt. Okay, now that the alternator bottom nut is loose, now we can loosen our 12 millimeter tensioner bolt. And remember, only loosen your 12 millimeter tensioner bolt as needed until you get enough slack out of the belt to remove your drive belt from the pulley. Here's a look at one of the old belts that we took off compared to the new belt right here that we're installing. Again, here's the part number for the alternator belt we're using. Here's a diagram of the water pump slash fan pulley and the crankshaft pulley slash harmonic balancer. The yellow dotted line is going to be the groove we're going to use for the alternator belt. Take a look at the pink line. The pink line on the left is your crankshaft pulley groove we're going to use for the compressor belt. And you can see the pink line to the right. That groove is actually the compressor pulley itself. Also in pink, you can see that that line or that belt is going to route under your fan pulley. The light blue dotted line is the routing we're going to use for the power steering belt. This diagram is for personal use. The actual diagram is probably somewhere under the hood on the front clip or around the front clip near the headlights. Here we go. Now our alternator belt is going to go around the cooling fan. Once you get it around the cooling fan, it will go around the cooling fan pulley, or it's also the water pump pulley. Once you get it around the water pump pulley, you put it around the crankshaft pulley, and the crankshaft pulley is directly below the fan pulley. Once you get it around the crankshaft pulley, you're good to put it around the alternator. Just like that. Next, I'll be tightening the tension bolt to the proper amount of belt tension. Once you have the correct belt tension, then the alternator bottom nut can be tightened. After getting this bottom nut and the tensioner bolt snug down with the ratchet, come back with the torque wrench and torque that bottom nut. Once tightened, come up top and snug your 14 millimeter top bolt down on your alternator. Come back and torque it down with the torque wrench. Here's a part number for our compressor belt. Now we're here underneath the vehicle installing the compressor belt. And the compressor belt will not route around the cooling fan. It will simply route around the bottom crankshaft, and the crankshaft is directly below the fan pulley, and there are 3 grooves on the crankshaft pulley, and the compressor belt will be routed in the middle groove like this right here, then around the tensioner pulley, and last around the compressor pulley, just like that. Here where my fingers are is the 14 millimeter compressor belt tensioner bolt. After installing the compressor belt, the tension bolt will be tightened to the proper amount of belt tension. Once you have the correct amount of belt tension, then you can tighten the pulley nut. We'll come back and torque the pulley nut to the correct value. After the compressor belt pulley nut is torqued down to the correct value with our torque wrench, that'll wrap up the compressor belt installation, and we'll move on to the power steering. Here's our power steering belt part number that we're using. Okay, our power steering belt will go around our cooling fan and the cooling fan pulley, and it will also go around the crankshaft, and it will go around the crankshaft groove that's on the far forward side of the crankshaft pulley. By that I mean the power steering belt is in front of all the other belts on the bottom crankshaft pulley, as seen in the previous diagram. Now, after routing the power steering belt around the fan pulley and the crankshaft, I'm going to route it around the power steering pump pulley next. And once your power steering belt is routed around the cooling fan pulley, the crankshaft pulley, the power steering pump pulley, you can move forward with tightening the tensioner pulley. The tension bolt will be tightened to the proper amount of belt tension. Once you have the correct amount of belt tension, then you can tighten the adjacent mounting nut. Please refer to your maintenance manual for further details. Alright, now that we have our power steering belt fully installed and we have our correct tension, now we can go ahead and tighten the bottom adjacent nut, similar to what we did on the alternator side. And we're going to tighten the upper bolt on the power steering pump. Now we're reinstalling our air intake hose and reattaching it to the throttle body here. Please reconnect all vacuum hoses you removed while removing the air intake hose. Next up is our air intake air filter box. And I'm gonna reconnect the box to the intake hose, just like this. And next we're going to tighten our hose clamps right here, number 1, and the second one, number 2, here. Next up is the mass airflow sensor connector. Push on tight until you hear the click. And last but not least, our last vacuum hose for our air intake box. You might want to use some needle nose, duck bills, or small channel lock pliers to reinstall your vacuum hose clamp. Now it's time to tighten down and secure the air intake filter box with our 3 12mm bolts. Thanks for watching, everyone. Subscribe and smash that like button.